Britain has raised its security threat level from severe to critical following the suicide bombing in Manchester, which killed 22 people. The move means that further attacks may be imminent. Prime Minister Theresa May made the announcement from Downing Street after chairing another emergency COBRA meeting.
The change in the threat level means that there will be additional resources and support made available to the police as they work to keep us all safe. This means that armed police officers responsible for duties such as guarding key sites will be replaced by members of the armed forces, which will allow the police to significantly increase the number of armed officers on patrol in key locations.
Authorities here say they now know who the suicide bomber is, and it turns out tonight he was known to police. They blasted their way through his home today, and you're about to see it right here. Here's ABC's chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross.
Today, in the frantic search to see if others are involved, police blew open the door of the bomber's home, looking for any clues about the suspect. One officer was seen with a small book entitled Know Your Chemicals. Later, they took one man into custody nearby, identified by neighbors as the terrorist's older brother.
The investigators need to focus on who else may be involved. Where did this individual learn to build a device like this, to carry out an attack like this? The real question is there a cell that goes beyond this individual?
Tonight, we're learning more about the bomber himself, 22-year-old Salman Abedi, identified on the front page of the London Sun tabloid as pure evil. He was born in Manchester, the son of a family who emigrated from Libya. A college dropout, Abedi was once one of the almost 500 young men known to British authorities as possible terrorists.
Abedi was a terrorist suspect in the UK. MI5 were aware of him. They were aware he posed a potential threat, but they didn't think he posed the imminent threat that he obviously proved himself to do in Manchester.
Manchester police have actually been planning for a terrorist attack for some time. This training exercise was held just last year at a Manchester shopping mall to help authorities plan for an attack on a crowded, soft target.
Well, echoes of what happened here made it all the way across the Atlantic, of course, and here is our justice correspondent, Jeff Pegues.
Within minutes of the attack in Manchester, New York City police dispatched heavy weapons teams to high-profile locations like Madison Square Garden. In the Dallas area, police also made a show of force at a John Legend concert. Hosko says terrorists view people entering and exiting events from papal masses to hockey games as easy targets. Typically, security is relaxed when an event ends. You exhale because the event's over.
That's right.
But what Manchester shows is that maybe you have to rethink that.
That's right, and rethink how do we push security, and we've seen this at airports as well. How do we push those security perimeters back in a way that just doesn't make the choke point further back?
But in some places, it's not practical to change the perimeters. Correspondent Don Daler is in New York's Times Square.
It's especially challenging here in Times Square, where 300 to 500,000 people pass through this pedestrian plaza on any given day. With 8 streets and multiple sidewalks converging here, this is a vulnerable area that police say they simply cannot make 100% safe.
Police acknowledge that they can't do it alone and that there is strength in numbers. In New York, these subway posters encourage people to watch for danger.
Following the terrorist attack in Manchester, which killed 22 and injured dozens, the French government has decided to extend the country's state of emergency. The powers were introduced after Islamist gunmen and suicide bombers killed 130 people in and around Paris in November 2015. The measures were due to end in mid-July, but according to the newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron, they will now continue until November 2017. Macron, once critical of an indefinite state of emergency, also asked his government to prepare legislation to strengthen security measures permanently. If approved by Parliament, it would be the 6th such extension. Human rights groups have previously raised concerns over the emergency rule, arguing it diminishes civil liberties.
Questions are being asked again about security in Europe, with yet another terrorist on the watch list slipping through the fingers of the authorities. French police noticed one of the Paris attack suspects had been posting pictures of Islamic State's flag on social media. That was just a week before that attack in November 2015. A suicide bomber in the Brussels airport attack in 2016 had also been flagged up by Turkish officials as a potential terror threat, but Belgian authorities seemingly ignored Ankara's warnings. And the Westminster attacker Khalid Massoud was known to UK police for years, with a host of previous convictions.
We live in an era of security. Every year we sacrifice more rights, more freedoms and more privacy for a little security. And here's the payoff. For years, visitors complained about the lack of proper security at Manchester Arena. While some described purely superficial checks, others claimed their bags weren't inspected at all. And these complaints were written even as terror and bombings savaged Europe. You'd think that was warning enough.
We were at the Ariana Grande concert, just exited when the bank went off. People were panicking. There were only bag check, nothing else.
I was at the arena in Manchester, and they only check your bag, not you, and anyone can walk in with things under a coat.
Muslim extremists abducted a Catholic priest and more than a dozen churchgoers on Tuesday night in the Philippines. The Philippine president placed 22 million people under military rule because of the threats from ISIS militants. The extremists took over buildings, ambushed soldiers, and put up Islamic State flags as they took over streets and bridges. The incident happened after the Philippine army was completing an operation to capture a top ISIS leader.
The president of the Philippines has warned he'll deal harshly with militants after martial law was declared on Mindanao Island. The move to place the island of 22 million people under military rule came after clashes between government forces and Islamist fighters, in which 3 soldiers died and 12 were wounded. President Duterte, who's from Mindanao, cut short a visit to Moscow where he met President Putin. He said the situation would be similar to the 1970s rule of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Critics have described the move as an overreaction and fear it could lead to abuses.
ISIS occupied a province in Mindanao. Подразделение ИГИЛ заняло провинцию. And there is still fighting going on. И по-прежнему сейчас идут столкновения, боевые действия. And I have to go home because I should be there at this time. I come here to seek your friendship. И, конечно, здесь сегодня я приехал для того, чтобы заручиться вашей поддержкой и подтвердить нашу дружбу. And to trade and establish trade and commerce with your country. Yeah, I'm sorry if I hurry up, but I need to buy, if you can grant me a soft loan, or if I have the money and pay right away. Because the arms that we ordered from America was cancelled. And I'm having a problem now with the ISIS. There's a rebellion.
We definitely can cooperate in the military technical sphere. At the beginning of our conversation, I would like to express condolences regarding the losses of lives of people in your country because of the terrorist attack.
The Pakistani army say they have shelled Indian military posts and caused major damage in the restive region of Kashmir. The attack is said to be in response to an Indian mortar strike on areas controlled by Pakistan. The Indian military announced early that it had struck Pakistani posts along the military border, but only to prevent militants from entering Indian-controlled areas. India has accused its neighbor of supporting terrorists, but a Pakistani military spokesman dismissed the claim as baseless and misleading.
The South Korean military fired warning shots at an unidentified object flying across the DMZ from North Korea on Tuesday afternoon. The Joint Chiefs of Staff says the object, which may have been a drone, was detected in the Cheolwon area in the eastern province of Gangwon-do at around 4 p.m. Sources say almost 100 machine gun rounds were fired at the object. The South Korean military says it's analyzing the object and its route and has strengthened its air defense posture.
U.S. Navy SEALs killed 7 suspected al-Qaeda militants in a raid in Yemen. 2 SEALs were injured during the operation on Tuesday, May 23rd. U.S. forces called in air support and the militants were killed by a combination of ground and air fire. It was the deepest the U.S. has gone yet into Yemen to conduct a raid. Central Command spokesman Colonel John Thomas told the New York Times the raid was an intelligence gathering mission. The Washington Post reports the raid took place about 30 miles north of where the U.S. carried out another intelligence gathering raid on January 29th. A Navy SEAL was killed in that operation along with as many as 25 civilians. Referring to Tuesday's raid in Yemen, a U.S. defense official told CBS News, quote, "There will be much more of these."
I'm standing along the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and this place has seen a lot of action in recent days. The Saudis are using artillery fire to repel the Houthi militias who are attacking watchtowers here along the border. Now, this is a serious threat for the Saudis. The Houthi militia is backed by Iran. It's not only backed, but funded by the Iranians, and that is, of course, Saudi Arabia's biggest enemy. Some experts actually in this region call this a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis see it as an existential threat.
Absolutely. We cannot have Iran involved in Yemen. Yemen is a strategically important country, 28 million people on our doorstep, and sits at the entrance of one of the world's most critical waterways, the Bab el-Mandeb, which also connects to another critical waterway, which is the Suez Canal. A very large percentage of world trade flows through the Red Sea, and if those waterways are controlled by hostile forces, it would present a tremendous danger to international trade.
Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council says the liberation of Iraq's Mosul and Syria's Idlib from Takfiri groups does not necessarily eradicate the ideology behind terrorism. Ali Shamkhani made the remark in a meeting with security officials of Russia, Syria, and Iraq held on the sidelines of the annual Moscow Conference on International Security. Participants in the meeting also slammed a recent $110 billion arms deal signed between Saudi Arabia and the United States on Saturday. They said such deals would only increase instability in the region, noting that multilateral meetings should be held periodically in order to improve effective coordination in the battle against Takfiri terrorists.
Donald Trump didn't leave empty-handed. He left the Middle East with a bag full of new arms deals, among them Bahrain, which bought 19 Lockheed Martin F-16 jets and smaller arms. Amnesty International strongly criticized the move, saying it might worsen repression of any opposition forces in the country. Well, the organisation also lashed out at the Bahraini authorities for the latest crackdown on anti-government activists, which saw at least 5 people killed and hundreds injured. A new wave of sit-in protests began on Saturday when a prominent Shia cleric was sentenced to 1 year in jail for money laundering. The global body Human Rights Watch has told RT a war crime has been committed in a brutal attack in Libya which left around 140 people dead. On Thursday last week, a militia group loyal to the UN-backed government raided an airbase where opposition forces were stationed. Fighting in the area is still ongoing. A UN-backed government condemned the assault and said it never gave such an order. It also temporarily suspended its defense minister and the head of the militia group that stormed the base.
Hamas, the Islamist terror group and de facto government of the Gaza Strip, is calling U.S. President Donald Trump's speech at the Israel Museum yesterday racist in the extreme. Trump's speech, which praised the ancient ties of the Jewish people to the Holy Land, was well received in Israel. But the spokesman of the hardline Islamist group says that it establishes the pillars of a new Israeli apartheid regime. Hamas claims that the president is only calling it a terrorist group because it refuses to bow to the dictates of America. A Hamas spokesman is tweeting that accusing Hamas of being a terrorist is like accusing the entire national Palestinian struggle. The majority of the Western world considers Hamas a terrorist organization. Another terror group, the PFLP, held a rally in Gaza City on Tuesday, aiming rifles at an effigy of President Trump and pronouncing him unwelcome in Palestine.
Civil war wages on in Myanmar's north. The country has more than 20 armed ethnic insurgent groups. State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi leads the civilian government, but under the country's military-drafted constitution, she has no authority over the army.
It is complicated. There are many stakeholders in this process with different goals and ambitions.
There was a peace conference last August, but since then, the fighting has actually escalated. Ethnic armed groups are still fighting in northern Kachin and northeastern Shan states.
We're talking about an intensity in which the civil war has never experienced. I mean, the almost daily use of airstrikes, heavy artillery, major troop movements, firefights happening on an almost daily basis in several different areas.
Tens of thousands of people have been displaced during the past few months, many seeking shelter in IDP camps and monasteries. There was a significant step taken recently when the government said that the ethnic states will be allowed to write their own constitutions. But longtime observers say it may take a lot more than that for a lasting peace.
President Trump at the Vatican this morning, a ceremonial arrival complete with the red carpet and Swiss guards. His first meeting with Pope Francis, First Lady Melania wearing a veil here too. A slow procession to meet the Holy Father, President Trump seeming to take it all in.
Because evil came out in honor of you.
The president's entourage, including daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared, waiting outside as the president entered the Pope's private library. A handshake between the two world leaders before they got down to business. The meeting lasting about 30 minutes. At times, the president beaming alongside a very serious Pope. This face-to-face comes after their very public feud last year. The Pope called building a border wall unchristian. Then candidate Trump took him on.
For a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful.
But today, the two sides hoping to find common ground, even on areas of disagreement, like the environment.
The Pope gave Trump a small sculptured olive tree symbolizing peace and a copy of his encyclical letter on the need to protect the environment from the effects of climate change. Trump handed over a boxed set of writings by Martin Luther King and promised not to forget the pontiff's message.
The entire White House delegation invited in to meet him. The First Lady asking the Pope to bless a rosary. Ivanka Trump said she was humbled. And the two men who so publicly clashed, today ending their meeting in a handshake. Yeah, so there were no cameras inside for the meeting between the president and the Pope, but we are hearing a little bit about what they discussed. They talked about the situation in the Middle East. They talked about the protection of Christian communities around the world. A number of international affairs issue talked about here today. Later today, Robin, President Trump heads to Brussels, where he has that meeting on NATO.
A new HQ for NATO that cost €1 billion. What will Donald Trump, the real estate mogul turned US president, make of that? He's in Brussels to talk defence and terrorism.
Terrorists struck again this week in Manchester. This was a barbaric attack which deliberately targeted children, young people, and their families. That is also why one of the two main topics we are going to discuss tomorrow is how NATO can step up its efforts contributing to the fight against terrorism.
Trump, the candidate, branded NATO obsolete. Trump, the president, says the alliance needs to do more in fighting terror, and he wants Europeans to spend more on defence. This is where the EU sees a bigger role for itself.
The European Union in the field of security and defence makes NATO stronger, and a strong NATO is key to European but also to American security.
Time is ticking, say the experts. The US is already turning its attention to other security hotspots across the globe.
The relationship has started changing, in fact, already under Obama, with the shift of the American strategic focus to the Pacific. And this power vacuum that the American left is the condition of possibility for Russia invading Crimea and for the destabilization of Middle East and North Africa. So Trump is just accelerating this trend, which push more pressure on Europeans to cope with their neighborhood, to stabilize their neighborhood, to fill the power vacuum that the Americans have left.
Taiwan is now the first Asian nation to recognize same-sex marriage. The country did not allow gay unions, and its court ruled that barring same-sex marriage was a violation of the Constitution. Authorities are now required to enact or amend relevant laws within the next 2 years. Legislation enforcing the new ruling is already working its way through the legislature, where both parties support the legislation of same-sex marriage. Taiwan already has a large community, and their annual Gay Pride Parade is the biggest in Asia. The majority of the public is also in favor of same-sex marriage. That is according to recent surveys.
Evie Flanagan loves police officers so much, she celebrated her 5th birthday with a police-themed party. As a surprise, her mom emailed the local Maine Police Department to invite a special guest, Officer Brad Chase.
Hey, Evie. Who's your favorite police officer? Officer Chase.
The two met during a snowstorm, and Officer Chase gave Evie a tour of the police station. At the party, Evie was wearing her very own uniform when her favorite officer walked in. Her mom says it was the highlight of Evie's life. Evie plans to be a police officer when she grows up. She says it will help her make the world a better place. Looks like she's already got a head start.